Mark Rosewater, head magic designer, describes Throne of Eldraine in his articles as a cake. The Camelot part is the structural part, and fairy tales are the flashy, icy part. Together it makes for an extremely rich and flavorful cake. The stories are conveyed through mechanics such as gingerbrew becoming unblockable except by creatures with haste, or true love's kiss exiling artifact or enchantments. Beyond these initial flavors that are immediately recognizable, there are undertones I picked up that made me appreciate this cake so much more. Eldraine set was designed to allow stories to be mixed and matched. You could, for instance, give a poison apple to the fairy godmother armed with Excalibur. Of course, this isn't how the legend of Excalibur goes, but it's a fun design choice and it brilliantly represents the mixing and matching occurred in the source materials, Arthurian legend and fairy tales. To ensure cooking accuracy, I referenced the Wildered Quest, which is a story about Eldraine. Maybe there was some information in there that could help me. I'm going to avoid major spoilers, but I'll be discussing key plot points. The story follows the quest Will and Rowan embark on in search of their father, High King Kenrith, who's gone missing. Kenrith is the ruler of Ardenvale, which, along with Vantress, Lochthwain, Garenbrig, and Embereth, are the 5 courts that comprise the orderly society known as the Realm. The Realm keeps chaotic magic and its creatures that come from the wilds in check. With the High King missing, it's possible the wilds will try to encroach into the realm, but the real urgency into finding the king, and the reason why food tokens were designed for the set, is the Midwinter Hunt. The story really begins to unfold during Midwinter. It's a celebration that lasts for 3 days, and each night there is a large feast. It's celebrated in the realm, and Will and Rowan join King Yorvo of Garenbrig and Queen Ayara of Lochthwain on one of these nights. The twins come to learn that on the 3rd and final night, elven clans in the wilds go out on Midwinter Hunt, which is a practice outlawed in the realm. The riders hunt all night and kill the prey at dawn, and to the elves this is necessary for appeasing the earth and the sky with a sacrifice. The meal that comes from their hunt is then shared between the elven clans to bind them together. So where does the Midwinter Hunt and the realm come from? There is a lot of mixing and matching in Arthurian legends and fairy tales, by which I mean there have been several adaptations and retellings of these stories. Even though the realm is inspired by stories of King Arthur, there is no one canonical version. The original manuscripts themselves were derived from multiple sources. We have Layamon's Brut, which is a poem translated into Middle English from the Norman language poem Roman the Brut by Wace, who in turn got his stories mostly from Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae. Wace's poem includes the first mention of the Knights of the Round Table, the inspiration behind Circle of Loyalty. He also includes artwork such as this one of a giant roasting a boar, which is the inspiration behind Giant Skewer. His work also includes the first known image of Stonehenge, which depicts giants aiding in its construction. While the Great Henge is obviously inspired by Stonehenge, a specific scene in the book seems to be a reference to this artwork. In the Wildered Quest, King Yorvo is asked to arrange the stones around the Great Henge in order to direct the Henge's portal destination. The very first time Stonehenge is mentioned is actually in Geoffrey's work. As the story goes, Merlin suggests to King Aurelius, I think that's how you pronounce it, a stone circle just like the one in Ireland to honor the nobles killed by the Saxon. However, moving these heavy stones would be impossible by normal means. It was only with Merlin's magic that the large stones could be moved onto the ships to be brought back to Britain. It was in Geoffrey's work that Arthur is styled as a king for the first time, and is having a relationship with Ambrosius Aurelianus as nephew and uncle. Oh my god, I'm butchering all these words. The first time Arthur is even mentioned by name is in Historia Brittonum. Instead of being king, Arthur was described as having fought in 12 battles alongside the kings of Britain. So King Arthur, the inspiration for Kenrith, the returned king, comes from a long history of retellings and revisions. With a better understanding of the realm and its inspiration, I now have a time period to look for a recipe. I then examined the other part of the cake, the wilds and the Midwinter Hunt, to see if the food is of cultural significance. The hunt is a motif that appears time and time again in Germanic folklore, but the first time it was documented was in Jacob Grimm's 1835 book Deutsche Mythology. Considering the brothers Grimm and their work is the predominant influence for the fairy tale part of the cake, I believe their version of the hunt was also used. They are best known today for their collection of fairy tales and folklore such as Cinderella, the Golden Goose, the Pied Piper, Jack and the Beanstalk, Hansel and Gretel, and Snow White. Their tales were originally much darker, but have been adapted to be more suitable for younger audiences. As you can see, even this side of the cake has its own share of revisions and retellings. As further supporting evidence of the Grimm brothers' version of the Wild Hunt being used, I think Garrick, cursed huntsman's design, comes from Deutsche mythology. The following is an excerpt that describes the Wild Hunt being led by a figure, and it reads, "In Lower Saxony and Westphalia, this wild hunter is identified with a particular person, a certain semi-historic master of the hunt. The accounts of him vary. Westphalian traditions call him Hackelbernd, Hackelburned, Hackelberg, Hackelblock. There are others again which tell how Hackelberg dwelt in Soiling near Uslar, that he had lived in the fear of God, but his heart was so much in the chase that on his deathbed he prayed God that for his share of heaven he might be led in the Soiling till the judgment day. His wish became his doom, and oft in that forest one hears by night both bark of hound and horrible blast of horn. His grave is in the Soiling too. The arrangement of stones is minutely described. 2 black hounds rest beside him." That depiction explains the Wild Hunt being led by a master huntsman, which of course describes Garrick. It also mentions his unwavering love for the hunt, which sounds like the curse that's forcing Garrick to hunt the planeswalkers relentlessly. Then you have the detail of the 2 black hounds, which I believe is where the loyalty ability which generates 2 wolves come from. In the Wildered Quest, instead of the master huntsman leading the wild hunt, it's kind of reversed. For reasons made clear once you read the book, Garrick is actually following the elven riders during the Midwinter Hunt, and they lead the charge with horns as described here. A horn call swelled out of the darkness. Suddenly, they were engulfed in a violent storm, blowing past them. Now that we know where the Midwinter Hunt comes from, what about Midwinter itself? In the book, Midwinter was a celebration that lasted for 3 days, and the realm observes it. Here we have the last example of history being rewritten. Eldraine's Midwinter event is actually inspired by Germanic Yule. Yule used to be celebrated on Midwinter with feasting, drinking, and a sacrifice. It used to be celebrated for 3 nights, just like in the Wildered Quest. Information about Yule comes from the saga of Hakon the Good, and despite its historical accuracy coming into question by scholars, I think it's still the source material being used for Eldraine. The saga explains that King Hakon of Norway rescheduled Yule to coincide with Christian celebrations. Once he became more influential and respected by the country, he began to Christianize and reform pagan Yule. Practices such as Yule singing became Christmas caroling, and Yule board became Christmas ham. Speaking of which, Yule boar is represented in this food token artwork. The table is set out in the wilds, as you can see in the background, and the table is covered in hunted prey and foraged fruit. A boar would be sacrificed for Yule, but when Christianity took over, people had to stop making sacrifices according to the saga. The change in tradition sounds exactly like the realm forbidding the wild hunt and their sacrifice during midwinter, but still allowing the rest of the festivities to remain. I chose to make this food because it's explicitly mentioned in the book, and there is a picture to reference. Historically, a variety of meats were used, including deer, rabbit, and pigeon. The pie shell was meant to be very tough, to the point it was inedible. It worked as an easy way to carry food, and it would be eaten warm or cold. I couldn't find any recipes from as early as the 9th or 10th centuries, but I found this one that's supposed to be from 1430. As far as I know, no stores in my city can sell venison, so I'm going to make the meat pie with pork instead. For the pork pie, I began by making the pie shell. Combine 3 cups of flour, 1 cup of whole wheat flour, and 1 teaspoon of salt. Bring a pot of lard and water to a boil, making sure that the lard has dissolved completely, and then, while it's still boiling hot, pour the water into the bowl of flour. Quickly work the water into the flour thoroughly with a wooden spoon, eventually switching to your hands to work with the dough. It'll still be hot, but at this point it's not going to burn your hands. Flour your workstation and then knead the dough for a few minutes before cutting it into 2 equal parts. Then from each piece, Remove about 1/3 of it and knead those small pieces into a ball, and they'll be acting as our lids for the pie. Then knead the 2 larger pieces of dough into a ball and let them rest for 30 minutes. While they are resting, I took this time to prepare the meat. Against better instincts, add the ground pork to the pot of boiling water and let it cook until it's no longer pink. In the meantime, take whole black peppercorns and grind them using a mortar and pestle. Afterwards, separate the husks from the spice using a sieve. Once it's done, drain the pork but reserve some of the liquid, and I ended up only using a lot less than what's shown here, so you'll maybe need about a cup's worth and it'll be fine. This liquid will be acting as our gravy, which had a much looser definition centuries ago. Season the pork with sea salt and black pepper from earlier and set it aside. Now onto the actual making of the pies. For this step, be sure to avoid any cracks or crevices that are too thin, as it'll break under the pressure of the meat and the gravy. Begin by rolling out large balls of dough into 1-inch thick circles. Take a cup and press it into the dough to shape the base, and then pull up the ends against the edge of a cup. At least that's how it should work, but I somehow managed without really using the cup. Forming the bottom half of the pie is tricky because there is a balance to working with the dough while it's still warm so that it's moldable, but cooling it with your hands so that it stiffens in place. I did alright with the first pie, but I just couldn't get the second one to work. Add the ground pork into the pie shell. Then take the small ball of dough and roll it out to form a lid. Use an egg wash on the lid and on the inside of the pie shell so that the lid can be pinched closed. Use a small knife to cut out a hole from the top, and then add a little bit of our gravy, but not too much or it'll break and spill everywhere. Coat the outside of the pie in egg wash and then make the second pie using the leftover dough and pork. Bake the pie for 10 minutes at 400 Fahrenheit and then bake it for another 40 minutes at 350 Fahrenheit. After all that time, the food token is finally done. Should you make this pie? No. It tastes like basic ground pork. The pie was baked for so long that the outside of the pie was tough, but the inside, which was exposed to the gravy, was still soft. But that was the intent hundreds of years ago. The pie shell would have been discarded after the meat was eaten, because the pie would have hardened especially just after an hour if left out. I want to make this again, but with a modern take. I really think it would be fun for like a D&D night, and with the right ingredients, it'd be extremely delicious. I think you could do something like braised meats in this pie, or maybe do something simple like shepherd's pie.